Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucia and this is Lulu's Leaves. Today I want to talk to you guys all about philodendron care. I really love philodendrons. I know you guys know I love philodendrons, and I feel like I have a really good grasp on how to take care of them. So in today's video, I really want to go through and tell you guys everything that I know about how to care for philodendrons. If that sounds like something that you are interested in, definitely continue watching this video all the way through to the end because that really does help me out. Also, if you do enjoy this video, you can give it a thumbs up and subscribe down below so that you don't miss out on any future content. But with that being said, let's get straight on into today's care guide. There are so many different types of philodendrons available on our market, and I think it's just so amazing that there really are philodendrons for everyone. If you don't like the basic heartleaf philodendron, there are so many different types that have more unique leaf shapes and more unique growing patterns. So there really is something out there for everyone. You guys know me, I really do love my heart-shaped leaf philodendrons, and most of those are either climbing philodendrons or they are crawling philodendrons. And I want to make sure that I show you guys some of my favorites at the end of this video, so stay tuned if you are interested in that. I'm also going to talk about how to propagate all different types of philodendrons because it is very different from species to species, or at least growth pattern to growth pattern. I will start off with some of the basic care tips and then go into depth on some of the care tips that are more plant specific. So the first thing that you do want to make sure you have under control when you're taking care of a philodendron is the amount of light that you're giving them. There are 4 different directions and 4 different strengths of light that you could give your plant, but a lot of that has to do with where you are and is there anything obstructing the window, or are you using grow lights? There are so many different ways that you can provide light for your plants. But one thing that's really nice to note with philodendrons is the fact that they are able to survive in lower light. When you do put a philodendron in a lower light situation, you are going to see slower growth. You're also going to have to water your plant less and make sure that you don't overwater and cause root rot because the soil isn't drying out as quickly. But those are minor things, so they definitely can survive in lower light. But if you do want your philodendron to thrive, I suggest putting it in a brighter light situation, but always in direct light. So in my experience, the best place for a philodendron would be a few feet away from a south-facing window, closer to a east or west-facing window, or on the windowsill of a north-facing window. You can definitely get away with having your plant pulled back a little bit from each of those windows, but the ideal scenario would be in those specific places. You can also use grow lights to supplement that light if you can't provide them with great lighting all the time, but I will definitely have some linked below that I suggest. I love Mars Hydro, I love some from Amazon. There are so many different options available at so many different price points, so don't be overwhelmed if you don't have big, beautiful windows in your house. Another thing that's really important to consider when taking care of your philodendrons is humidity. These plants are actually relatively easygoing in terms of humidity, so if you don't have a humidifier or your humidity sits around 30 to 50%, your plant's probably going to be just fine. The only time where some philodendrons do run into trouble is when they're putting out new leaves. And that is mostly, in my experience, with philodendrons that are climbers. I don't know why that is, but they usually do have a little bit of trouble when they are coming out of their sheaths. So you can either supplement that by adding some humidity with a humidifier or keeping your plant in a greenhouse type of situation, or you can make sure that when that new leaf is coming out, you're misting it and you're giving it lubrication to come out of its sheath, because otherwise you do run the risk of that leaf ripping, which I've had happen to me many times before. So don't worry if that's happening to your plant, just give it a little bit more humidity. I would say best case scenario for humidity would be 60%, but if you can only provide 50-ish%, that's probably going to be just fine for your specific philodendron. Watering can also be a tricky subject because it really does depend on the conditions that your plant is in. If you're keeping your plant outside, it might need to be watered every single day depending on the type of soil you have it in. But for the most part, the biggest thing that you have to remember with philodendrons is to let the soil dry out before you water it again. So you don't want to continue watering a plant that's already damp, or it will get root rot, and that's not something that you want. So make sure that the soil dries out. If you have a moisture meter, I like to let it go to a 2 or a 1. If you don't, definitely just make sure that the pot is really light and you don't feel any moisture when you stick your finger in the pot. When it does get to that dry stage, make sure you're watering it thoroughly and let the water drain all the way out until you see it come out of the drainage hole. And make sure that you have a drainage hole. The soil that you give your plant is also really important. Philodendrons do not want to be sitting in pure peat, so you need to make a mixture for your plant for it to be super happy. You want to give your plant a good mixture of peat, you want to give it some perlite and some bark so that it's very well draining, because again, philodendrons don't like to sit in wet soil. So if you have fast draining soil, it will just allow the plant to keep a little bit of moisture, but not so much that the roots can't breathe. Sphagnum moss is also a suitable medium for philodendrons. If you don't know how to grow your plant in sphagnum moss, you can check out my last video. I will link it up in the cards so that you can go watch it after this video. But sphagnum moss is also really great for some of those plants that need a little bit extra humidity. So if you have a philodendron melanochrysum or a pink princess that often gets stuck, sometimes sphagnum moss is a better medium for those types of philodendrons. But if you're not comfortable with that, soil is also acceptable. The last thing that I want to talk about before we get into propagation and my favorites, fertilizer is also very important when it comes to your plants. You want to make sure that you're feeding them or they will decline. I like to fertilize my plants every single week with a liquid fertilizer, and I like to do it very diluted. So usually it would say every other watering, use this at this strength. I like to take that down to a quarter of the strength and give it to them every single week. You also want to make sure before you do fertilize your plant that you know what's in the soil. So if there is some slow release fertilizer, you definitely don't want to add way more fertilizer to that because it will overwhelm the plant and likely burn the roots. So make sure that you know if there's slow release in there and when it will expire, because then you need to start fertilizing after that is no longer working for your plant. If you want to know how to fertilize with sphagnum moss, again, check out my last video. That will give you all the information that you need. Now I want to talk about how to propagate your philodendrons. There are so many different types of philodendrons with different growing patterns, so I want to make sure that you guys know how to propagate given each different growth pattern. So I'm going to show you guys now with a few different plants how to propagate. All right guys, so here we have a philodendron melanochrysum. This is a super beautiful plant and they can be really easy to propagate. So I do want to show you, this is an example of a climbing philodendron. So any other climbing philodendrons will be able to be propagated the exact same way. So if we look through the leaves here, we are looking at the stem of this plant. I'm going to take off this tape so that you guys can see a little bit better. So the first thing that you want to do is identify the nodes on this plant. So climbing philodendrons can be a little bit easier because usually they do have these little aerial roots that are trying to grab onto something. So this here, where those aerial roots are growing, is a node. If you want to propagate a climbing philodendron, you need to give yourself a node. So if I wanted to propagate this new leaf right here, I could cut this plant right here. because that would give me a node to work with and a leaf. You don't necessarily need this leaf because each node also has an auxiliary bud, and from that auxiliary bud we could grow a whole new plant, but the best way to do this is with a leaf. So yeah, you would just want to cut right here. You could also cut right here or right here. If you were to propagate this plant, I would suggest either using perlite or sphagnum moss or any other type of substrate, but for this video, I'm really just talking about how and where to make the cuts. So again, to reiterate, find yourself a node with some aerial roots, make a cut, and stick it in your choice of medium. Here we have my Philodendron Brazil that's hanging from the shelf above, but this is an example of a trailing philodendron, which is very similar to the climber. This is another plant that you want to make sure you're looking for nodes with. Again, that's going to be the case with all philodendrons for the most part, but these ones are very easy to identify. So right here you can see that same little crown of aerial roots on that. So basically you could make a cut anywhere along here. You would want to cut between the two nodes, and you can make single leaf cuttings, you can make 2 leaf cuttings, but you want to identify these nodes here and chop on either side. If you want a top cutting, you want to make sure that you get the tip and a leaf, and then chop below the node. So the next plant I want to talk about is this Philodendron pastizanum, because this is a crawling philodendron. So the propagation is very similar, but a tiny bit different for this plant. As you can see, it has a stolon, which is just this part of the stem that runs across the ground and roots into the ground. You can see here that there still are nodes. Each of these lines that run across the stolon are nodes. And if you can look on the undersides, you can actually see those aerial roots that we saw on the other plants digging themselves into the substrate. I wanted to show you this plant because I have already propagated it here. I actually just made a cut down the center of the stolon. I gave this plant a node. You can see the aerial roots down there. And I also made sure that it had this auxiliary bud where this leaf would push through, which you can see now that it's been separated from the mother plant, it is pushing that leaf out. So we had a node and we were able to cut right down the stolon and give us a new plant. One thing that's really nice about propagating these plants that are crawlers is usually they're going to have roots deep down in the soil already. So usually you don't have to root it. But if you did, you would just place it on top of your preferred medium and those roots would eventually grow into the medium. Last but not least, I do want to show you guys also some of my favorite philodendrons. Alright guys, well that is going to be all for today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe down below. But with that being said, that's going to be all from me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!